Welcome to our lecture series for the Human-Centered Design Bootcamp. In this video, we will be focusing on the synthesize phase. A critical part of the human-centered design process is the identification of a meaningful and actionable problem statement, which the design team will focus on solving. This is perhaps the most challenging part of the human-centered design process, as choosing a problem to focus on will require you to synthesize the information you collected and generated from the understand and empathize phase. So now that you have completed your design research and empathize with the stakeholders, you have to take all the qualitative data you have gathered and synthesize it. In the process of synthesis, we make sense of the data and create new insights that will drive our innovation process. During the synthesis phase, you unpack and synthesize your findings from the previous stages into compelling needs and insights and scope a specific and meaningful challenge. At this point in time, our focus should be on finding opportunities for design. We should ask ourselves, what is the right problem to solve? In this stage, your team will process all the information gathered, synthesize the findings, and translate them into insight to uncover opportunities and ways to look at the problem with fresh perspectives. This process of abductive reasoning helps us to infer meaning and redefine problems to generate new solutions. In opposition to the first two phases, where we were in divergence mode, the synthesize phase, it's more about convergence. This means that you will be focusing on sharing your findings and insights within your team and to make choices. Two goals of the synthesize phase are to develop a deep understanding of your users, the problem, and the context, and based on that understanding, to come up with an actionable problem statement. This problem statement focuses on specific users, insights, and needs that you uncovered during the empathize phase. More than simply defining the problem to work on, your redefined challenge is your unique design vision that you crafted based on your discoveries during your empathy work. Understanding the meaningful challenge to address and the insights that you can leverage in your design work is fundamental to creating a successful solution. So, what does synthesis mean? Synthesis means making sense out of what we see and hear to uncover opportunities for design. Although it might feel a bit chaotic, it is a rigorous process for getting to a deeper understanding. So, our energies should be spent on crafting and realizing new insights with the goal to reframe the problem to uncover opportunities. So, what are opportunities for us? Opportunities areas, as we call it, are the places we see the greatest potential to meet user needs through design of future products, services, spaces, or systems. Opportunities are the springboard for concept generation. An opportunity is not a solution, but rather it suggests many solutions. One example would be, how might we design a new type of medical packaging that increases medical adherence? The goal of this phase is to identify the needs of your users and stakeholders based on what you heard and saw about their experiences, motivations, and emotions. At the end of this phase, all team members should be clear on a new redefined challenge that they will use to inform the design work. The team will also craft how might we questions that you will use to generate new solutions. In order to choose what problem to solve, we first need to try to answer these two questions. What are the patterns and themes that emerge from our design research? And what are the most interesting problems to solve or needs to address? To shed more light into how we can uncover the answers for these questions, let's learn more through this case study. Every year around the world, 3 million babies die within the first 28 days of their life. That's 6 babies every minute. Most of these deaths are forgotten about for the most part, except for by mothers. This is the absolute worst tragedy a mother could endure. There's no more helpless of a feeling than watching your child die. And yet, in many of these communities, not only do mothers lose their children, they are blamed for these deaths. I now know that a mother, no matter how poor, no matter how impoverished, no matter how uneducated, will go to any length to save her baby. If there are this many babies still dying, there's something deeply wrong with the solutions and the systems that exist today, including a lack of technologies that empower these mothers to save their children. One of the biggest problems these babies face is staying warm. They are unable to regulate their own body temperature. That is the primary function of a baby incubator. But incubators cost up to $20,000. They require a constant supply of electricity, and they require a trained doctor or nurse to operate. In a country like India, where there's one doctor for every 2,000 patients, this poses a huge challenge. So, a design team made of students from Stanford was given the challenge to come up with a low cost way to tackle this problem. Their initial problem statement was, how might we design a cheaper and easier to maintain incubator? As the team began their work, they started their need finding in Kathmandu, the capital city of Nepal. After spending several days observing the neonatal unit of the Kathmandu hospital, the team asked to be taken outside the city to see how premature infants were cared for in rural areas. They were very surprised by seeing this scenario in front of you, a number of incubators which were not being used, and they wanted to explore why. This is what a typical village in Nepal looks like. Most of the babies that are taken care in that specific hospital in Kathmandu would be coming from villages such as this one. And most of these villages are at least 6 hours away from the city hospital. Once they interviewed and conducted their design research, they came across some very interesting learnings. They learned that the overwhelming majority of all premature babies were actually born in rural areas, and most babies never made it to the hospital. This is surprising. Once they came back from the field trip, they started to process the information and observations they gathered from the design research. The design team used a tool called observations and guesses to infer meaning from observations into guesses. In this tool, you start with something you noticed, experienced, observed, or heard, your observation, and then end up with a guess about why it matters. And you do that through inference by asking yourself, what does this mean to me? So here's a specific example from our case study. So the team observed that there was empty incubators in the Nepali hospital. They also heard that I couldn't make the trip to the city with my child. From those two observations, they inferred the meaning. So their guess is that the greater need is to help premature babies survive where they are born. So they thought it was about building a cheaper incubator, but actually it was about saving as many premature babies as possible wherever they are born. So you see the difference in their perspective, which led them to reframe the problem. Now, it's not about designing an incubator that is low cost or easier to maintain. The reframe problem is how might we design a way to help a mother keep her premature baby alive and growing where they live. The team went even further. They decided to define and identify design criteria. To save the maximum number of lives, their design would have to function in a rural environment. It would have to work without electricity and be transportable and intuitive and sanitizable and culturally appropriate and perhaps more importantly, inexpensive. So they decided that whatever solution they would come up with, it would have to respect these criteria. So the team went on to ideate, brainstorm, and come up with ideas. And they came up with Embrace Warmer. It looks like a little sleeping bag for a baby. And the core technology is a pouch with a wax type substance, a phase changing material that, when melted, maintains a constant temperature of 37 degrees for about 8 hours. You can heat this back with a short burst of electricity or with boiling water, and you can reuse this over and over again. The product is portable, has no moving parts. It complements existing practices of skin to skin care, and it was designed to be easy and safe for a mother to use, even if she is uneducated. And the cost is about $25. So, this case study tries to reflect the importance of reframing our problem based on insights from the design research. We initially thought that it was about building a cheaper incubator, but then understood that the most important problem to solve was actually about keeping the babies alive where they lived. It's a completely new perspective on the problem that opened up a completely new solution space. So let's look at some tools and methods that we will be using during the synthesize phase. During this stage of the challenge, designers narrow from lots of information to a statement that is inspiring and specific. This phase of the design challenge will include analyzing the information you collected from your design research activities through the observations and guesses tool, inferring interesting insights to build a point of view statement, and then writing several how might we questions. As usual, you can refer to the guidebook for more depth and guidance, where you will find instructions on how to use several of these tools. You'll find a case study, facilitation tips, and a number of reflection tools and rubrics to self-assess your progress. So now that we will be moving into the act of actually using tools and methods for synthesis, let me show you what synthesis looks like. What you can see here in the picture is a common room where synthesis happens. You can see a number of post-its. You see the team together engaged with all the information, pictures from the field research. And it might feel a bit chaotic, but at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is to make sense of everything we learned so far. So let's try to look at it from a step-by-step perspective. Generally, We start with a team share, sharing the stories that we heard. A team share serves at least three purposes. First, it allows team members to come up to speed about what different people saw and heard in the field. Even if all the team members were present for the same fieldwork, comparing how each experienced it is still valuable. Second, in listening and probing for more information, team members can draw out more nuance and meaning from the experience than you may have initially realized. And this starts the synthesis process. Third, in capturing each interesting detail of the fieldwork, you begin to saturate the space with post-its that contain individual observations. So, how do we do this? You start by unpacking observations and airing all the stories that stick out to what you saw and heard during your empathy fieldwork. Each member in the group should tell user stories and share notes while other members headline quotes, surprises, and other interesting bits, one headline per post it. One important thing to have in mind is that we don't capture everything everyone said. We only capture what is interesting, surprising, contradicting, or intention. The end goal is to understand what is really going on with each user. Discover who that person is and what that person needs in regards to your problem space. And in this example, we interviewed three people, and on the screen, you can see various post-its with observations that we made that are interesting, surprising, or contradicting about each of these individuals. Next, we group our observations into related themes and summarize each cluster with a label. So here, the post-its, we take the same post-its, but instead of getting them organized by the individuals, we start to mixing them up in terms of belonging to the same theme. And once these themes starts to emerge, we put another post-it with a label on them. In this case, we identified four different themes based on the interviews that we realized. Next, we start to generate insights that capture the essence of what you learned and provide a fresh way to look at the challenge. So in this case, we took all the post-its for theme number one, and we tried to summarize that, encapsulate the learnings into one insight. And we did the same for the other themes as well. So let's see what that applies to each of the tools that we will be using with a specific case as an example. So as I mentioned, the observations and guesses is a tool that help you to highlight compelling observations and translate these observations into guesses. This diagram shows that we are trying to jump from observations on the left side to insights on the right side. Let's again look at our example from the case study. We noticed our observations were that we observed empty incubators in the Nepali hospital, and we heard I couldn't make the trip to the city with my child. And from those observations, we asked ourselves, what does this mean? And we infer the meaning of understanding and realizing that the greater need is to help premature babies survive where they are born. So this leads us to exploring more deeply the concept of insights. What are insights? Well, insights are not easy to define, but I will try to throw some light into defining or making it more tangible for you. So, insights are really the heart and soul of creating new solutions. Insights or the best insights are usually generated from surprises, tensions, and contradictions. So when you are interviewing and when you are taking notes on your interviews, make sure that you are paying attention to identify those bits of information, those quotes, those pieces of story that encapsulate the surprises, the tensions, and the contradictions. But an insight is not an idea. An insight is the start of possibly hundreds of ideas. And what does a good insight feel like? How do we know if we are in the presence of a good insight? How can we evaluate insights? Well, it's not easy. The best way I found to check if an insight is a good enough is to do some internal checking about how you feel about the insight. Because usually insights feel like a new realization. It often feels like, aha, or hmm, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but that could be right. So if it feels like an aha moment or a surprising moment, then you might be in the presence of a good insight. You also can look at the typical eyebrows of an insight. Typically, when you hear or listen to a great insight, your eyebrows do, mm, or uh-huh. So pay attention to those signs especially when you are telling these insight to your colleagues and see how they react. And an insight is a combination of information and experience. When you go out in the field, you collect information, you collect observations, and then you analyze all that data. But you are going to combine that with your emotions, with your experience. And that combination of input of information that is coming from the outside world and processing it through your experience, those two things together are the ones that have the potential to create great insights. Is when you combine the left part of your brain with the right part of your brain, when you bring together your analytical side and your emotional side. Let's look at one specific example that you can also find in your guidebook. In this particular example, we interviewed three different people and we had very interesting conversations with Halima, Marlene, and Silvana. Although these interviews contained a lot of information, the team selected the four most important pieces of information, the top observations, and they color coded it. You can see that the observations are grouped by the individuals. So then the team started to remix all the post-its and they started to organize them into themes. And five themes emerged. One was around building confidence in caregivers. Another one was around student voice and choice in learning. So here you can see that now the post-its have different colors because they were coming from different individuals, but now they are being grouped in terms of themes and topics. And on the right side, you can see the guesses, the insights that the team came up with. Let's look at some examples. One is students and caregivers want to know they are on the right path and making progress. So maybe this tells us a bit more about the importance of knowing if you are doing the right thing or not. Another one says when students feel like they are in control of their learning, they are more engaged and motivated. Hmm, this is an interesting insight, which leads me to think that maybe there's an opportunity for us to put the learning more under the control of the student for them to stay more engaged and motivated. Another one is parents are doing a job that they were not trained for. Well, this is also interesting, and it unlocks a range of opportunities to improving upon this particular challenge we brought as an example. Let's move into the next tool in our Synthesize toolkit, the POV. The point of view is a written, actionable statement that expresses the problem that the design team is trying to address. So, point of view statements are a helpful way of synthesizing what you experienced, observed, and heard to make inferences about what you think your user might need. A point of view statement helps outline your design challenge into an actionable problem statement so you can begin brainstorming solutions. And most importantly, your point of view anchors your project and helps you to articulate your challenge meaningfully. Usually, it follows this structure. One, we met and we will identify a person. We were surprised to notice and will embed an observation. We wonder if this means, and we'll embed an insight or a guess. And lastly, it would be game changing too, and we'll identify an opportunity. So, this is an exercise of kind of fill in the blanks where you will refer to a person, something that you observed in engaging with that person. You will then guess what is the insight, and from there, you will derive an opportunity. So let's look at one example. We will apply this point of view tool to the case study we were exploring in the beginning of the lesson. We met Leela, a Nepali young mother. We were surprised to notice that she couldn't make the trip to the city with her premature child. We wonder if this means that the greater need is to help premature babies keep warm to survive where they are born. It would be game changing to find ways to help parents in remote villages give their dying infants a chance to survive. So, as you can see, this is us bringing together all the work that we've done previously. We have our user, the person we interviewed. We have an observation, something we heard or saw. We have our guess or insight. And then we derive an opportunity to explore further. The natural next step would be to convert that point of view to a how might we question, a single open ended question that can inform our brainstorming efforts. So we could say something like, how might we create a baby warming device that helps parents in remote villages give their dying infants a chance to survive? So let's learn more about what are these how might we questions. How might we questions are a way to redefine the problem into an area of opportunity because a problem well stated is a problem half solved. And we are at the stage in our human centered design process where we need to decide what problem we are going to focus on. You, as a team, you must decide what problem you are trying to solve. So, why how might we questions are so important? Well, how might we questions help us to redefine the problem into an opportunity for design. It also helps us to synthesize all the information from everything we learned into a single question that we will try to answer. How might we questions also help us find a specific statement that enables the team to generate many, many ideas and solutions? And hopefully, it's a statement that brings energy and inspiration to the problem. But there are some criteria that we should use to find good how might we questions. The how might we questions that are good in nature should speak to a real need or goal. They should be broad enough to accommodate a wide range of solutions. They should allow for meaningful brainstorm and should not include a direct solution. So how do we create how might we questions? How might we questions usually follow a structure. We start by how might we, and then we add a verb that implies change. We prefer verbs that are expansive, like build or create or enhance or reimagine. And then we embed the stakeholders. Who are we designing for? Whose life we want to impact? And then we add the opportunity. And crafting how might we questions is not about coming up the best question you ever wrote. We actually aim to write many, many questions because there are no right or wrong questions, and we are looking for questions that can inspire ideas and action. And the way to get to good questions is by writing many questions. Let's look at another example from point of view to how might we questions, and then we'll see a number of variations we can create within our opportunity area. So in this point of view, we met Rekha, a teenage girl from a rural village in India. We were surprised to notice that she eats mostly bags of chips and other unhealthy food. We wonder if this means that she doesn't know how to distinguish between unhealthy and healthy nutritious foods. It would be game changing to find a way to support Rekha in her food choices so she can grow in a healthy way. So, this outlines the point of view. Now, let's look at a number of possible how might we questions to address this point of view. Some possible how might we's are: how might we make healthy eating appealing to young females? Or how might we inspire teenage girls towards healthier eating options? Or how might we make healthy eating something which teenage girls aspire towards? Or finally, how might we make nutritious food more affordable? So I could go on and on and on, but I think you might get the gist. It's about giving us several options so we can choose from the framing that better suits our team and our way of looking at the issue. Another thing to remember, which we covered in our previous lesson from the understand phase, is to define and identify what is the right scope for our how might we question. Is it too narrow or too broad? So let me bring here a couple of examples. How might we make the lives of people in villages more comfortable? Is this too narrow or too broad or just right? Well, this one might be too broad. How might we get people in villages to adopt savings accounts? Well, this one might be too narrow. What about how might we create a financial safety for people in villages? Well, this might be just right. So make sure when you are crafting your how might we questions, and especially when you are selecting one, make sure that you select one that is just right, not too narrow, not too broad. So, in summary, the synthesize phase is critical to the design process because it explicitly expresses the problem you are striving to address through your design efforts. In order to be truly generative, you must first craft a specific and compelling problem statement to use as a solution generation springboard. Thank you and see you in the next lecture.